A lot of NBA to dive into. Michael Kaskey Blomain, CBS Sports, covers the Sixers, covers the NBA. He's got his latest out, 5 NBA coaches on the hot seat that we want to dive into. Obviously, there's one big name on that list that we will dive a little deeper into. But I want to start with Michael. What's going on, my man? How you been?
What's going on, Mike? Thanks for having me on.
You got it, brother. I know no hoops and to watch every night. You got to be. What are you doing without hoops?
That's a good question, Mike, and it's been a constant struggle to try to find something to fill it in. A lot of Netflix, trying to read some books that I haven't had the chance to get into, some video games, just, the normal.
Did you read the Tanking to the Top yet?
Not yet, but that's it's on my list. It's definitely one I'm planning to get to during this break.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know when you finish it, so we can kind of. I read it already. We talked to Yaron a couple times on the show already. We did like a 2-part book report on it with him a couple of weeks ago, and it took me about a weekend to read the book. So let me know when you finish it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's pretty good. There's some stuff in there. Some of it's regurgitated stories that I'm sure you probably are aware of, but there's some nuggets in there. What do you think of the? First off, are you consuming the NBA 2K tournament?
Mike, I tried to. I'm obviously a fan of the NBA, and I play 2K. I'm a fan of it, and obviously, I applaud the NBA for really trying to do anything they can to, provide some entertainment to the masses when they obviously can't, be together in the same gym. But it was, kind of tough for me to watch. It was just, I don't want to say boring, but for lack of a better word, it just was kind of boring. I felt like it needed maybe like another announcer or something, but having it just be the players and like talk, there wasn't a lot of trash talking. There wasn't a lot. Just didn't seem like there was a lot going on.
Are you going to be into the horse?
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. I think it'll be interesting to see how they pull that off with, each individual player in their own isolated gym. But that has the potential to be, to be pretty fun. A couple guys on there, obviously, Trae Young, Chris Paul, some guys that are capable of, pulling out some cool shots. So it's, again, for me, it comes down to I appreciate the NBA, at least trying to put out something entertaining for the people when there's not much else going on.
Yeah, the horse thing is kind of intriguing, I guess. It's going to be on this Sunday night at 7 o'clock, right?
Yeah, I believe the first round is this Sunday night, the first matchups, and then the championship, I think, is Tuesday night, something like that.
Okay. Michael Kaskey Blomain at The Real Mike KB. Now, you put a poll out that I was not too shocked at the results. If the rest of the NBA season is canceled, should Brett Brown be the coach of the Sixers next season? About over 1,500 votes. He did not get a lot of support. So, number one, are you surprised by that?
I wasn't surprised by the fact that, more people voted for no. I was a little bit surprised by the percentages. It was, 72% to no compared to 28% yes out of, like you said, over, I forget the exact number, something over 1,500 people. But I was surprised that it wasn't a little bit closer to, 60-40 or something like that. I was surprised that, how overwhelming it was in favor of getting rid of him. But ultimately, we've had, both you and I have had our, finger on the pulse of the fan base for a while, and with that said, it's not shocking that more people would like to see him than stay.
Yeah, I'm not surprised either. 72% to 27%. But what is the message there? Like, do you think that the front office, because they're in a tough spot? We're going to get into your 5 coaches on the hot seat here, and he's obviously on that list. But he seems to be like, I think, Michael, if there is no season, that the Brett Brown future, that is the biggest offseason conundrum in the NBA.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you there, Mike, because he's the one coach that there was a pretty clear barometer ahead of him where in terms of how he was going to be evaluated. Whereas, if you reach this bar of success, you're good. We'll bring you back. If not, we're probably going to look to go in a different direction. And without that, they're going to have, if that doesn't happen, if the season doesn't resume, that decision is going to have to be made without that test to determine it for them. And at that point, your guess is as good as mine what they decide to do.
Yeah, this season was about the playoffs. There is no playoffs. So are you judging him based on a disappointing regular season? If you're the Sixers front office, I feel like they're in a very odd spot here. But I don't know if they're tracking Michael Kaskey Blomain's Twitter and they say 72% of their constituents don't want him back. Do they make a very rash decision during a time where there's no hoops being played?
And I think, you made a really interesting point I think it was last week when I was on talking to you, Mike, in terms of, there's no revenue coming in. Obviously, the BRI, basketball-related income, right now is at a standstill. And Brett is, currently under contract moving forward. So it would be a situation where the Sixers would have to, to fire Brett, pay out the rest of his contract and then bring in somebody else to be the head coach at a time where, moving forward for the next, at least the next 12 months, you would think, money in terms of what it is usually is going to be a little bit tight around the league. So that's a kind of another interesting layer that wouldn't be, the case normally if things were operating as usual. So I think that's going to be something else that factors into the decision, as will, the most common answer, I know you said this multiple times, and so have I, to the people that are, calling for Brett to be fired, is what's one thing to say, all right, he's not the guy, but then you have to identify who is going to be the guy. And there doesn't necessarily seem to be, to me, at this point in time, a very robust market of coaches that you could say, immediately point to him and be like, all right, this is the guy that's going to, turn things around. There's not like a prime Phil Jackson or somebody kind of lurking out in the shadows. It would be an easy guy to identify and say he would be the guy. So even if you do move on from Brett, you would have to, identify someone that you could say is definitely a step up from him and it could help this team. And at this point, I don't think there's one clear-cut guy that does that.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that they're on this hiatus here, there was an article, I guess, from John Hollinger over at The Athletic, and he wrote, Michael, more awkwardly, what does a playoff team like the Sixers do? While most insiders think Brett Brown's seat is somewhere between unseasonably warm and inferno hot, it would be extremely awkward for the Sixers to potentially launch into a July playoff run with a brand new head coach and little lead time. But after the season, will there be enough time to execute a proper change, and will other teams have already poached the best targets? So they're in a weird spot. Like if they decide, you know what, let's just do something now and then have somebody lead them into the playoff, that doesn't seem likely. And then how short is the offseason going to be when they start the next season to bring someone new in and have to implement all sorts of things? So it sounds like the Sixers would be in a really weird scenario. And let's say they made the playoffs in July, and let's all hope that maybe that happens. They're back to playing basketball, and they get into the second round, and they get knocked out again in the second round. So you would say that's a fireable offense most likely, but how much time is the offseason going to give you to pick up the pieces and start over?
Yeah, exactly. And that's something, obviously we don't have the answer to at this point, Mike. We don't know, when the season could potentially start, what that would mean then for, the next season after that, how the schedule would have to be shifted to make up for that. But the fact that the Sixers are dealing with this in this time frame, like you said, only works to complicate things. And, at least at the surface level, I think could potentially work in Brett's favor a little bit, just because of, the things you kind of just pointed to. Would there be enough time that they would feel comfortable? They have this window open now in terms of the guys that are under contract and the guys that are getting big money. That window is now. And if there's, a compromised offseason where they wouldn't feel comfortable making a necessary switch or the time frame that doesn't work out, would they want to say, this is one more chance for Brett that wouldn't be there if it was the regular NBA schedule with the playoffs ending in June and training camp starting in September. That might not be the case, but as it is now, there's a chance that could technically work in Brett's favor, just in terms of, there's not enough time, and there's also not enough, good candidates out there that might not already be poached by other teams to really, do something worthwhile.
Yeah, your list, by the way, includes Jacques Vaughn, who's an interim guy right now from the Nets. Mike D'Antoni, who's obviously a high-profile, big-name guy. He would be an interesting name, but, okay, the Sixers don't want to hire Mike D'Antoni. You don't want a guy who's going to be asking his team to shoot 45 threes. Brown's getting criticized for the amount of threes that the Sixers shoot already, so D'Antoni's out. Scott Brooks, no interest, and Jim Boylan, who was an interim guy who got the job, they can't stand him there. So none of these five or four seem like, okay, this guy's out of a job, let's go get him. I mean, is there a guy that you would say, look, if they fired Brett, this available guy would be the guy who interests me the most?
Not really, Mike. That's the toughest part to me. There's not, one person. I think the most intriguing name to me is one that popped up but's been shot down is Jay Wright here in Philadelphia, just because of the, the respect and the success that he's been able to develop at Villanova. But then you're talking about, taken the big gamble of getting a college coach to come up to the pro level, and that's been, I would say that in history it's probably been less successful than successful in terms of bringing up high-profile guys. You don't necessarily know how that's going to translate, and like I said, when you have that short window open, you certainly don't want to be shuffling through coaches. Like if you're going to move on from the one that you have, you want to make sure that you at least identify one that for a fact can help you. And as good as of a coach as Jay Wright certainly is, I don't know if there's a question mark there. And then there's the other guys that you hear mentioned a lot. Whether it's a Jeff Van Gundy or a Mark Jackson, the duo that's calling a lot of games. Jeff Van Gundy hasn't coached in over a decade. Mark Jackson was, the guy that was with the Warriors before the Warriors became the Warriors. So there's not a huge track record of success there. And there just doesn't seem to be one guy that if there was, there's no Greg Popovich or even a guy like Eric Spoelstra who has proven, that he could deal with talent and egos, anything like that. All the good coaches are already locked up. So for me, I'm not saying not to move on from Brett. It's just that there's not, a clear-cut guy for me out there right now that I would say, he's a clear upgrade. Now,
a lot of people, when Kenny Atkinson got fired, they were like, "Oh, hire him. Would he be an upgrade?"
Not to me right away. Like potentially he could be, Mike. I know he's well liked by the players. He obviously did well with that Nets team last year. But there's, obviously maybe if it was Durant and Kyrie Irving that didn't necessarily feel like he was the right guy to take them, or whether it was the Nets front office and why they, parted ways earlier this season. But there's no, I can't say with any certainty that he would be any better than Brett. And for me, that's the case with most of these guys out here. Yeah, there's potential and they're good, but they don't have the, the track record or the acumen to say with certainty that, yeah, they could be the guy to take this team at the next level.
Yeah, that's in it because, Kenny was essentially fired for what people want Brett fired for. He was the guy that got them to a certain spot, and the Nets, give him credit. They jumped in early and I guess identified that they didn't think he was the guy. Brett, now in your article at CBS Sports, Michael Kaskey Blomain's our guest at The Real Mike KB. I go back and forth. I have a definitive answer. Okay, if I say to you, what do you judge more as a positive or the negative? The 29-2 home record or the 10-24 home record, the wins over the Lakers, Clippers, Bucks, or the losses against the Hawks, the Wizards? Which one of those weigh on you more? The positive side and say, I believe more in the positive, or the negative side saying, I just can't believe in this team because of these things?
To me, I took out of the season up to this point, Mike, a little bit more of the positive side in terms of the ceiling of the team in a lot of those games that you mentioned, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Bucks, those home wins, and the general 29-2 at home overall. You saw the potential of a team that could compete, and potentially beat any team in the league, which they did. All the top teams in the league, the Cleveland and Philly, the Sixers took care of business. And to me, when you have a playoff series and a team is locked in and there's not going to be, you certainly can't discard the way they played on the road, but there's times where, it's the second night of a back-to-back or a night in Washington where Joel's not playing, and there's not that it's an excuse, but their mental, the concentration, the focus might not be there night in and night out. We're in the playoffs, it better be there, and I think there's reason to believe that it would be. So to me, if the season doesn't get finished, it is still, some people will say that, the Sixers got saved from embarrassment, which could be the case if they went in and lost in the first round. But I also think that they showed that they could, they had the potential to be that team that they were touted to be, and if maybe they had put that together in the postseason, they still could be. So, I was a little bit more optimistic, I think, than some people were. And, to me, that 29-2 at home held a little bit more weight than the road record.
I'm with you on that, Michael, in terms of I take more from the positives that you showed me than the negatives. Being, if you would have lost to those teams and you set the same record, I would say, but you really hadn't beaten it. The fact that you raised your level up against the very best and were able to beat them, you have this home record. I take more from that and feel that the team could surprise more than they would disappoint.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I think I would agree with that. And I think you would expect that, come a playoff series and the experience that they would have gained over the course of the regular season, which was still an issue. It's not an excuse that people want to hear when you have four players getting, over $25 million a year. But they were still, figuring each other out. We talked to Al Horford a lot, and he continuously said that it was a work in progress and that they weren't where they wanted to be which, some fans just, kind of push that stuff off. But it's a reality that they were working through. They had just moved Al to the bench before the injuries popped up, and they didn't really get to expand that out. And who knows, by the time the playoffs rolled around, maybe that he had, grown comfortable in that role, and the rotation had evened out a little bit more. Shake Milton emerged at the end there as a guy that you were looking at as, maybe he could play some minutes in the postseason next to Ben and have Ben bump off ball and open the offense up a little bit more. So I think there were some positives, and they were kind of trending in the right direction. And then obviously now, it's a crapshoot. We don't know, how it's going to advance from here.
All right. Check out more from Michael Kaskey Blomain, of course, CBS Sports at The Real Mike KB. We will continue to look at the NBA as they get creative. The horse game, they got the NBA 2K stuff. So there are some things happening out there. It looks like the players got paid today, which is interesting because there had been some reports that if they got the full paychecks, that was a good sign that they're going to, try to get this league back up off the ground.
Yeah, I think it is a good sign, Mike. Again, ultimately, it's out of the league's control, obviously, but everything Adam Silver said, everything that we've heard is that they really want to get this thing back. They don't, it would be an absolute worst case scenario to finish the season without crowning a champion, even if they had to go to extreme lengths to do that, whether that means, a super truncated postseason, a postseason where all the teams are just like stationed in Vegas for 2 months and there's no fans, whatever they have to do. Obviously it's going to probably have an asterisk in the history books next to it, but their goal is to at least be able to have someone raise the trophy by Labor Day. So obviously, like everyone else right now, they have to wait and see how this develops. But I know that they're doing everything possible to, evaluate options to get the players back out on the floor.
He's Michael Kaskey Blomain, and he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. You the man, Michael. I'll talk to you soon, pal.
You too, Mike. Thanks for having me on, man.
You got it. At The Real Mike KB. Check out his NBA coverage over there.